Part 27. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocienu. Chapter 261. A sudden gust of wind blew over the silent mountain road. Warm air waves descended from the sky and hit the forests and trees below. Looking around, several motorcycles were speeding past in the distant sky. These motorcycles were of strange style, with the wheels at the bottom turned sideways and two jet valves popped out. Even the tail was equipped with a power device to promote acceleration, just like a high-tech floating motorcycle. Several motorcycles passed by and gradually went deep into the jungle deep in the mountain road. According to Luo Ziyuan and his party, they took another extremely remote mountain road because they were worried that there would be an ambush of the enemy on the road ahead. Although they would walk a little longer, they were safer. After all, everyone in Luo Ziyuan's team was seriously injured and could not withstand another round of consumption. Mu Qiu had no opinion on this. Well, the guest should follow the host's wishes. Luo Ziyuan was still riding a hoverbike in the front. He turned around and looked at the place not far away. Mu Qiu was wearing a white shirt, holding the handlebars of the motorcycle and driving a red motorcycle beside him, and his speed was no slower than others. Lu Qianqian was sitting behind Mu Qiu, with her arms around Mu Qiu's waist, her head on her shoulders, her eyebrows curved, and a sweet look on her face. Luo Ziyuan said, "I didn't expect Brother Qiu to be so skilled. I was worried that Brother Qiu couldn't keep up with the team before." Mu Qiu smiled and said, "I just happened to be interested. The convenience of this kind of hoverbike is that you don't need to pay attention to the road conditions, you can run wild in the air." Mu Qiu has always been very interested in this kind of new things that he has never tried before. But the half-grown boy named Mao Yuming sat behind Luo Ziyuan, curled his lips, and looked a little indignant. He had also been coveting this cool hoverbike for a long time, and thought he would have a chance to show off his skills, but Luo Ziyuan had no intention of letting him drive it. Several other people belonging to the resistance army also drove hoverbikes and sped behind Luo Ziyuan. A row of motorcycles quickly passed by, and the jet valves spewed out some hot air waves, hitting the bushes on both sides. Gradually, they went deep into the jungle on one side near the mountain road. "Everyone be careful, there is no specific road marked in this jungle." Luo Ziyuan turned back and warned. In order to escape the pursuit, they drove away from the main road this time, and he had never been to this remote jungle. A row of hoverbikes flew low into the jungle, and occasionally a roar of unknown beasts came from the dark around them, which made people feel numb. Suddenly, one of the motorcycles stopped in mid-air. The only woman in the resistance team looked at the deep jungle ahead and suddenly said, "There's something going on ahead." Everyone stopped immediately. Luo Ziyuan looked at the woman and nodded. "Everyone be careful." Then he put the motorcycle into the box and walked slowly into the depths of the jungle. Seeing this, everyone also put the suspended motorcycle into the box and followed Luo Ziyuan's steps carefully. As several people walked slowly and carefully in the bushes, there were tall and towering trees next to them. In the end times, these plants were also more or less affected, and their branches and leaves were lush and their bodies were several times larger. Some of them even mutated directly and became killer plants that eat human flesh and blood. Mu Qiu had encountered mutant vines and mutant willows, but such mutant plants were still a minority after all. In a sense, the probability of mutant plants being born is much smaller than that of wild beasts and zombies. Nearly 10 people walked in the jungle with lush plants, and no matter how careful they were, they would inevitably make a rustling sound. Suddenly, a gust of wind whistled in the bushes nearby. Then two shiny steel forks pierced through the air and stabbed at everyone. A cold light flashed in Luo Ziyuan's eyes, and he drew out the giant heavy sword from his back. The electric arc instantly chopped and broke the two shiny steel forks. Then the heavy sword sent the two figures flying with the force of Mount Tai. The two figures were sent flying by the force of the mountain, and they crashed into the giant tree nearby like rolling gourds. And Luo Ziyuan also flashed and leaped in front of the two figures, with a black iron heavy sword standing horizontally above the two figures' heads. Everyone turned their heads immediately, but found that the one who suddenly rushed out from the depths of the jungle and attacked everyone was not the zombie monster they thought. It was actually two human men in simple clothes. The two humans had beards, dirty clothes, and thin bodies. Because they were blown away by Luo Ziyuan's giant sword, although he didn't use much force, the two men's mouths and noses were bleeding. The bodies of the two men were twitching all over by the electric current on the giant sword, and they leaned against the tree, not knowing whether they were alive or dead. Luo Ziyuan looked at the two men who were twitching all over, and then looked at the woman among his companions. "Axing, how is the situation?" The woman named Axing closed her eyes, opened her eyes after a while and shook her head. "There are no signs of other life forms around." Hearing Axing's answer, Luo Ziyuan frowned. Axing is an awakened person who is doing reconnaissance work in their team and has detection abilities. Since Axing did not sense the existence of other enemies around, then Luo Ziyuan looked at the two men who fell beside the tree roots. Where did these two people come from? After a while, the two men who had fallen on the ground woke up. The first thing they saw was a group of rebel teams surrounding them with wary faces. Soon, two screams echoed throughout the jungle. After a while, Luo Ziyuan and several companions looked at each other and finally figured out the origins of these two people. "You mean you are from the village at the foot of the mountain?" Luo Ziyuan looked at one of the tall and thin men with a slightly surprised look on his face. It is hard to imagine that in today's world, besides human bases, there are traces of human villages. After all, the horror of those zombie monsters is obvious to everyone. It is hard to imagine how a village can avoid a terrible crisis like a zombie siege. Seemingly seeing the suspicious looks of Luo Ziyuan and others, one of the men said nervously, "Our village was not established before the apocalypse, but was formed at the foot of the mountain by humans who fled from various places after the apocalypse broke out. Because our village is backed by a mountain road and next to the vast mountains, the chance of zombies appearing is very small. We came out today to try our luck and see if we could hunt some remaining wild beasts. Just now, I took action out of desperation because I thought some of them were wild beasts in the jungle." After hearing the man's explanation, everyone finally understood. It turns out that the so-called existence in the man's mouth was formed spontaneously by the survivors in the apocalypse. "Your village is built at the foot of the mountain." Luo Ziyuan frowned slightly and asked the man, "If they want to pass this mountain road, the foot of the mountain is the place they must pass?" The tall and thin man replied, "Yes, the location at the foot of the mountain is relatively remote, and you rarely encounter zombie monsters on weekdays." Then he looked around at the crowd and said, "You guys are going to pass through the mountain road. It's getting late now. Why don't you come to our village to rest for the night? There are many powerful beasts in the mountains, and they are most active at night." Luo Ziyuan first looked at the companions beside him. After 2 days of long journey, they basically didn't get much rest, and they were already injured. Even the strongest person can barely hold on anymore. Luo Ziyuan looked at Mu Qiu with questioning eyes again. "Brother Qiu, you must be tired too, right?" Mu Qiu smiled lightly and nodded, "Please do." Luo Ziyuan looked at the man apologetically, "Then I'm sorry for bothering you." Although this incident was a misunderstanding, he was the one who injured the person anyway. The other party also led them the way regardless of past grudges, which is something that rarely happens in the apocalypse. But having said that, Luo Ziyuan still gave his companion a look. The woman named Asine nodded. If something went wrong, she would immediately sound the alarm for everyone. Following the two men, everyone walked towards the foot of the mountain. Mu Qiu led Lu Qianqian to the back of the crowd, looking at the thin backs of the two men with an inexplicable smile on her face. "Sign in at the end of the world, Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Yu. Chapter 262. Although the entire mountain road was rugged and winding, the overall journey was not long. After just a few minutes, the group followed the 200 dressed men to the foot of the mountain. During this period, they naturally encountered some of the wild beasts in the mountains that the men mentioned. What surprised them a little was that a considerable number of these wild beasts had not yet mutated. Even the few mutated wild beasts that they occasionally encountered were dealt with by the people led by Luozayuan in a few moves. The 200 men also looked experienced and led everyone through a convenient path. In a few minutes, they passed a mountain. I saw a few wisps of smoke in the remote place at the foot of the mountain. Looking along the foot of the mountain, I can already see the corner of the eaves of the house. It can be vaguely seen that this is a small village, surrounded by a fence made of rusty iron rods and wood. When everyone followed the two men into the village, they couldn't help but marvel. In addition to the fence surrounding the village is full of earthen houses made of wood and stone. Wisps of smoke drifted slowly along the chimneys of the houses, but soon dispersed in the air. Although the road is muddy and uneven, it has a sense of déjà vu of a country road. The air backed by the valley is moist and fresh, without the rotten smell and disgusting bloody smell in the ruins outside. From time to time, some old people and children on both sides come out curiously to look at the crowd, with curious eyes. It seems that there has been no trace of outsiders in this village for a long time. The old and the young are happy and contented. Mu walked in the crowd and said slowly. Mao Yuming on the side raised his hand happily. I know, this is a very famous prose poem, Peach Blossom Spring. Luo Ziyuan smiled and said, Brother Chiu wants to say that they live like a paradise, right? Indeed, Luo Ziyuan was also surprised when he saw this village. This place is far away from the hustle and bustle of the city. There are no zombie monster attacks, and there is no intrigue between people. It is really as peaceful and tranquil as the peach blossom spring. Such a peaceful and pure land is rare in the world now. Mu Chiu shook his head and smiled without comment. I just said that they are really living well. As the footsteps of the crowd went deeper and deeper, more and more humans gathered around, all looking at them with curious and strange expressions. These people were dressed differently, of different ages, and some were even physically disabled. According to the tall and thin man in the lead, they were all survivors who fled from all over the place. Luo Ziyuan and his party were surprised to find that there were some awakened people with supernatural powers among these villagers. Roughly speaking, there should be hundreds of humans in this village. Soon, the tall and thin man dressed as a hunter led everyone to a brick house deep in the village. This house is obviously much more exquisite than other hastily built earth houses. The man went forward and knocked on the door of the house, and by then, many spectators had gathered around to watch the fun. All the villagers came to visit Mu Chiu and other newcomers who had just arrived in the village. But most of the attention was focused on Lu Qianqian, who was standing next to Mu Chiu in the team. The reason was simple. Lu Qianqian was one of the rare best in the world in terms of both appearance and figure. Many people looked at Lu Qianqian with surprise. They hadn't seen such a beautiful woman for a long time. After a while, the door of the brick house was opened, and a man in a white coat walked out. The man had a decent appearance, wore a pair of glasses, and was also neat and clean in a white coat. It can be seen that he was a very particular person. When the man in the white coat came out, the tall and thin man hurriedly stepped forward and said, "Village chief, I met these people in the mountains." The tall and thin man told the man in the white coat about the general course of events, and explained that Mu Chiu and his party were going to cross the mountain road to the next city. What Luo Ziyuan and his group didn't expect was that the tall and thin man actually called the square-looking young man in front of them village chief. The man in the white coat understood the whole story and looked at Luo Ziyuan, who was standing in front of everyone with a huge sword on his back. He walked slowly towards Luo Ziyuan, stretched out his hand and smiled. I am Duan Mucheng. I didn't know you were here. I hope you can forgive me for not welcoming you from afar. The young village chief who called himself Duan Mucheng even spoke in a literary manner. It can be seen that he is still a cultured person. After shaking hands with Luo Ziyuan, Duan Mucheng nodded to everyone again, indicating that he had met him. I didn't expect that village chief Duan Mu managed the village in an orderly manner at such a young age. I really admire him. Luo Ziyuan looked around at the onlookers and nodded to Duan Mucheng. Duan Mucheng shook his head and said, "We are all poor people living in the end times, and we gather together just to survive." On the side, Mu Qiu looked at Duan Mucheng with a playful look in his eyes, and suddenly said, "I see there are still many awakened people with superpowers in the village. I guess village chief Duan Mu must have great ability to convince them to serve everyone, right?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 263. After saying this, everyone's eyes focused on Duan Mucheng's face. Duan Mucheng smiled slightly and responded. Most of the awakened people in the village fled from the ruins of the nearby city. Everyone survived the dangerous ruins by chance, and they all hope to live a comfortable life. After saying that, Duan Mucheng turned to look at the men standing in the front row among the onlookers. The awakened people in the village spontaneously formed a guard team, specifically responsible for hunting the zombie beasts in the nearby mountains and forests. Thanks to everyone's efforts, the village has become peaceful. After hearing Duan Mucheng's explanation, everyone suddenly realized. The eyes looking at Duan Mucheng and the villagers became more and more surprised. After all, it is rare to find such a gathering place of mutual help and care for humans in the apocalypse. Mu Qiu also narrowed her eyes and nodded slowly. There was another brief conversation, dominated by greetings between the two parties led by Luo Ziyuan and Duan Mucheng. Luo Ziyuan's words were quite probing, but Duan Mucheng's answers were all watertight. According to Duan Mucheng himself, he was originally a key member of an internationally renowned medical company. After the end of the world, Duan Mucheng fled with everyone to this mountain range, and soon lived in seclusion at the foot of the mountain. Because of his leadership skills, he was elected as the village leader. After a moment of exchange, Duan Mucheng looked up at the getting dark sky, looked at the crowd and said, "It will take some time for you to cross the mountains, and there are often beasts and monsters in the mountains at night. Why don't we stay in the village for one night? Tomorrow I will send the village's escort team to lead a few people out of the mountain." Luo Ziyuan heard this and looked at his companions. After several setbacks, they were exhausted both physically and mentally. Nodding slowly, Luo Ziyuan cupped his fists and said, "In that case, I'm going to bother you all." Duan Mucheng waved. "Langpo, please find a place for everyone to stay, and find some food to entertain a few guests." I saw an old man with a stooped back slowly walking out of the crowd. This old man has a thin body, sallow skin, and wrinkles, and wears an old dark blue patterned hood on his head. And what shocked a few people was, the right half of this elderly lady's face was blurred as if it had been burned. The facial muscles are completely twisted together. At first glance, it looks as scary as a mummy. The old lady hunched over and walked to the front of the crowd. Even the words she spoke were hoarse. "Guests, please move on. The old lady will help you find a place to stay." Although the other party had good intentions, his terrifying appearance coupled with his hoarse voice. It was like a ghost coming out of a horror movie, which made everyone who was used to zombie heretics subconsciously alert. Duan Mucheng saw everyone's reactions and explained, "You don't need to worry about it. Luangfor was burned by fire during the escape. After rescue, he saved his life, but his appearance became like this. After hearing Duan Mooking's words, several people couldn't help but look at Longpo with a little pity in their eyes. There was no change in Longpo's eyes, and she said in a hoarse accent, "Tianlai novel network. Haha, it's all old news. The old woman won't live long at this age, so she doesn't care about this skin for a long time." After saying that, he led everyone towards a village near the back of the mountain. Under the brick house, Duan Mooking stared at the people's leaving figures and remained silent for a long time. "Sir, we..." Several awakened people among the villagers behind them stepped forward and seemed to want to say something, but were stopped by Duan Muqing with a wave of his hand. "Let's go." Duan Muqing's eyes were cold, he glanced at everyone's backs, and then walked towards the depths of the village behind him. But at this time, the villagers gathered around had not dispersed yet. They were all staring in the direction where everyone was leaving, their eyeballs filled with bloodshot eyes. There was a sound of swallowing. Duan Muqing suddenly turned around and looked at the villagers with fierce eyes. "Didn't you hear what I said?" Hundreds of villagers suddenly had panic in their eyes and fled in all directions. After a while, only Duan Muqing and a few awakened people in the village were left around. "Boss, don't you need to take care of those people?" Duan Muqing frowned slightly. "Those people are not simple. Since they can't take one bite, there is no need to ask for trouble. I'll find a chance to send them away tomorrow, and I'll tell everyone in the village to be honest tonight." Yes. The entire village is not large, and it only took a quarter of an hour. Longpo took everyone to an earthen house at the head of the village. The house is still made of discarded wooden boards and missing bricks. It can be seen that there has been no trace of habitation inside for a long time. "The guests will stay here tonight. The old lady will prepare some food for you." After speaking, Longpo staggered and turned around to leave. Luo Ziyuan looked at Ah Sing, the sentient awakener in the team, who slowly shook his head. "Nothing has been discovered yet." Mu Qiu smiled meaningfully and said, "I didn't expect this village chief to be so young and promising." Mao Yuming rubbed his messy hair and said vaguely, "I think there's something wrong with this village chief. He speaks in a formal manner, and I always feel like there's something weird about him." The strong man on the side hesitated and said, "But brother Luo, this guy is in this state and it's almost too much. Some people have a more open-minded view. I think this village is quite good. We have traveled for such a long time and we might as well rest here for a few more days." Luo Ziyuan looked at the gradually darkening sky outside and said, "We'll spend the night here first, and we'll set off tomorrow morning." After a while, the dragon mother came in carrying an iron pot. Everyone looked around and saw that the pot was filled with wild vegetables. There is also a circle of corn and sweet potatoes placed on the steamer of the iron pot. In a deserted village, there is nothing to entertain you. Please forgive me. No one was surprised by this. After all, they didn't expect any delicacies from this small, secluded village. The old lady lives in the house in front. If any of the guests need anything, just ask me." After Longpo left, Luo Ziyuan glanced at Ah Sing vaguely, and the latter nodded slowly. Seeing Ah Sing nod, everyone felt relieved, picked up the hot food and ate it. But Mu Qiu seemed to feel something, looking towards the other side of the village through the dusk. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 264. Under the night, the village was in a wilderness near the mountains. Duan Muqing stood in the forest, followed by several awakened strong men in the village. Suddenly, a group of lavender ripples spread in the air ahead. Several mysterious figures in purple robes emerged. At the moment these figures appeared, the strong men behind Duan Muqing suddenly knelt on one knee. "Greetings, Your Excellency." The three purple-robed men did not even look at the kneeling people on the ground, but looked directly at Duan Muqing in a white coat. Duan Muqing's face was gloomy, and he frowned and said, "What's going on?" "According to the agreement, they should not come here." The purple-robed man in the middle said coldly. "The people we are chasing ran here." Duan Muqing immediately remembered Mu Qiu and his group who entered the village not long ago. "You'd better let your people cooperate with us." After that, the figures of the three purple-robed men gradually dimmed and finally disappeared. "Boss, we..." A man beside him hesitated for a moment, and finally spoke. Duan Muqing spoke in a low voice, with his head down so that people could not see his expression. "Follow them." After several men left, Duan Muqing moved his feet and walked towards the hidden place of the village. After an unknown period of time, a blood-red pool appeared in front of Duan Muqing. The air was filled with a strong and pungent smell of blood, and there was a faint wailing in his ears. The pool in front of Duan Muqing was full of blood. Duan Muqing, wearing a white coat, slowly walked to a control console-like device in front of the blood pool. Bang! Suddenly, Duan Muqing hit the corner of the control console heavily. "Asshole! When did a group of wild dogs bark in front of me?" Duan Muqing's face was blood red, and his veins were bulging. He was completely different from his previous calmness. "Wait, I'll be back soon. Return to the position that should belong to me." Duan Muqing's eyes flashed fiercely. "Brother, I will surpass you in the end." Duan Muqing pressed the switch on the control console, and suddenly the blood pool in front of him shook. A high platform slowly rose from the center of the endless blood pool. On the high platform, a dark purple box floated into the air. "The world will be amazed by my masterpiece." In the middle of the night, a figure stepped out of the dim house where everyone lived. A half-grown messy-haired boy rubbed his sleepy eyes and walked out of the house. The wind in late autumn was already a little chilly, and the cold breeze blew over the boy's thin clothes. Mao Yuming shuddered subconsciously, and his sleepiness was instantly reduced by half. He looked around, but found that there was not even a toilet around. Without caring about so much, Mao Yuming hurried to a corner behind a house not far ahead. After a hissing sound, Mao Yuming pulled up his pants with satisfaction. Just as he was about to go back to sleep happily, he suddenly shrugged his nose. Immediately, Mao Yuming's face became a little weird. His ability is rare in the world. Although he can't compare with Sister Seeing, who is a perceptual awakener, in terms of perception. But because of his special physique, Mao Yuming's five senses are also stronger than ordinary people. Now he actually smelled a faint smell of blood in the air, mixed with wisps of meat fragrance. Mao Yuming looked at the sky in the middle of the night and muttered, "Who is still eating meat so late?" Driven by curiosity, Mao Yuming tiptoed towards the direction of the meat fragrance. After a while, Mao Yuming came to a mud house not far from their residence. Mao Yuming tiptoed gently and looked into the house through the broken doors and windows. There was a huge iron pot in the house, with a strong fire and steam rising from the firewood below. The wisps of fragrance came from the pot. The closer to the room, the stronger the meaty smell. Mao Yuming swallowed his saliva subconsciously. There was a chewing sound of gnawing meat in his ears, and Mao Yuming looked in the direction of the sound. There was a hunchbacked old lady squatting in the corner of the room, her shoulders hunched and she was gnawing on something. Through the hood on her head, Mao Yuming recognized at a glance that this was the dragon lady who brought them here today. What made Mao Yuming a little strange was that it was already the middle of the night, but the dragon lady was hiding in a corner of the house like a starving ghost, swallowing food crazily. Is she so energetic at her age? Just when Mao Yuming was puzzled, the old lady squatting in the corner slowly turned around. With the help of the dim candlelight, Mao Yuming finally saw the food in Long Po's hand. At this moment, Mao Yuming's eyes widened instantly, and his pupils flashed with an indescribable fear. What Long Po held in his hand was not the pig's trotter or chicken claw as he had originally imagined, but a human arm that had long been rotten. The blood-stained arm could vaguely see the white bones, and the skin was full of uneven teeth bite marks. Mao Yuming covered his mouth with all his strength to prevent himself from screaming, and his eyes were full of panic. The dragon lady slowly stood up, put the rotten arm aside, and turned to open the steaming pot. As the steam rose, Mao Yuming also saw various human body parts floating inside, and even a half-white human skull. The dragon lady's eyes were empty, and there was scarlet blood at the corners of her mouth. With her twisted half-face, she looked like a demon. Mao Yuming was immediately horrified, but he didn't wait for him to escape. The dragon lady in the house opened her eyes wide, and suddenly raised her head to look at the window. When their eyes met, Mao Yuming's pupils shrank suddenly. He was discovered. On a hillside near the village, Mu Qiu, wearing a white shirt, stood in the wind. Not far below him, there were raised graves. This is the cemetery in the village. Suddenly, the space behind Mu Qiu was floating. Lu Qinqian's charming figure emerged from behind Mu Qiu and said, "My lord, have you noticed something wrong here?" Lu Qianqian was already proficient in soul illusions, with quick perception and thinking. She vaguely saw some clues about this village and those villagers, but she couldn't be sure. Mu Qiu raised the corner of his mouth, put a finger on his lips, and made a gesture of silence. Although this village is backed by mountains, the beasts in the mountains and forests have no harm to it. Even within a few kilometers, I didn't feel any signs of invasion by strange beasts. I don't believe that there are no man-eating beasts in the depths of such a huge jungle. Mu Qiu's eyes swept to the cemetery below. Unless there is something here that can make those beasts feel afraid. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 265. Mu Qiu stared at the cemetery below the hillside. There, he felt some unusual breath. Standing on the hillside, Mu Qiu's feet were in the air, and he actually walked in the air, walking towards the cemetery below the hillside. Although Lu Qianqian didn't understand why, she followed Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu came to the mountain full of graves, and pointed to one of the open spaces with a light tap of his finger. Mu Qiu bowed slightly, put his palm close to the ground, and an ice blue mist floated out of his palm. The cold invaded, a crystal blue light flashed, and the land under Mu Qiu's hands began to turn into an ice surface at a speed visible to the naked eye. As the extreme cold penetrated, the surrounding large areas of the ground had turned into ice in just a few breaths. Even the deep underground below was frozen into a huge ice cave. Break. Mu Qiu opened the corner of his mouth slightly, and an unparalleled powerful momentum was infused from his palm to the depths of the earth veins. In an instant, cracks appeared on the frozen ground under Mu Qiu's feet, like a broken mirror. And these cracks also expanded to the largest size the moment Mu Qiu retracted his palms. With a series of loud cracks, the ground under Mu Qiu's feet collapsed inch by inch in an instant. Lu Qianqian was flying in the air, looking at the scene in front of her in surprise. When the ground that turned into an ice cave collapsed, it turned out to be a long and narrow underground passage. When this passage appeared, Mu Qiu did not show any surprise, and nodded to Lu Qianqian. Immediately, he walked towards the stairs leading to the underground world. It seems that this village is really problematic. Lu Qianqian muttered to herself, but she followed Mu Qiu closely. When he went deep into the underground passage along the stairs, Lu Qianqian realized that the walls in both places were made of some special metal. While isolating the sound, the entire passage was sealed tightly from front to back. As the two people walked deeper, the entire passage seemed to lead directly to the ground with no end in sight. The wide corridor was silent, and only when the two people moved would a deep sound of footsteps echo. After a while, a tall mechanical door appeared in front of the two people. Mu Qiu stood in front of the door. The door in front of him was also made of some unknown metal, thick and wide. There was also a screen device similar to palm print unlocking on the right side of the door. Miu smiled and shook his head, and stretched out his palm again. However, Miu was not aiming at the unlocking screen next to him, but slowly pressed against the heavy mechanical door in front of him. Tianlai novel network. The hot flames rose in the air, and the extremely concentrated flames gradually gathered. In an instant, a hole as high as a person was burned through the heavy metal door. At the same time, a rapid alarm suddenly came from the other side of the door. The shrill alarm echoed in the space, deafening. But Miu didn't care at all. He stepped over the mechanical door and walked slowly inside. What he saw was a huge pit like an underground cave. The air was filled with a strong and pungent smell of blood, which made people nauseous. When Lu Qianqian followed Miu in, she covered her mouth in surprise. I saw that the deep pit was flowing with hot and sticky blood. Candlelight flickered around the cave, reflecting the scarlet blood in the deep pit, adding a bit of weirdness to the whole space. In front of the blood pool, there stood a square control panel device. Miu walked towards the blood pool, and there was a shrill alarm sound above his head. At this moment, the door on the other side suddenly broke open from the inside, and two tall figures rushed out from the depths of the cave. Who dares to trespass into the forbidden area? As soon as the two strong men rushed in, they were fierce and ferocious, and a terrifying aura was brewing around them. They launched a killing move towards Miu and the others without saying anything. I saw a man transformed into an orc, biting towards Miu with sharp teeth and claws. The other man took out a black iron box, inserted a ring on his finger, and a laser cannon emerged. In an instant, a series of hot laser shells shot towards Miu and the others. The orc man had sharp claws, and years of fighting in the jungle had cultivated his hunter-like instincts. And Miu was his prey this time. Leaping into the air, he could even see the bloody scene of Miu's head being smashed by him. But the next second, the orc's body suddenly stagnated. I saw a thick ice shield condensed in front of Miu, directly blocking his steps. Elemental Awakener. The orc's eyes were startled, and he subconsciously looked at Miu. However, it was this moment of eye contact that made the orc's hair stand on end, and his hair stood on end. Miu's deep eyes seemed to have the ability to seduce souls, and people seemed to be swallowed into endless darkness just by looking at him. Behind Miu, a crimson demon phantom with two horns on its head appeared. Under the tall phantom, a huge and majestic dark red dragon coiled around Miu. Endless black and red flames swept across the raging waves, and the roar of tigers and birds could be heard faintly in the flames. This extremely terrifying breath was only leaked a little, and the orc was terrified. "Are you scared?" Looking directly at Miu's pupils, the man's body began to tremble. The emotion called fear spread rapidly in the man's heart. However, immediately afterwards, he felt as if something in his body had been taken away, and his body became increasingly weak. No. No, no. The orc man's pupils shrank suddenly, and the screams of fear from his mouth became increasingly weak. After a few breaths, the man's face wrinkled, his withered and old body fell to the ground, and his wide-open pupils were full of fear. Soul spell. As long as the other party has a trace of fear in his heart, the soul source representing life will be instantly taken away. Lu Qianqian, who was standing by, was stunned for a moment when she saw this scene. Just a glance killed a high-level awakener. Lu Qianqian's beautiful eyes were filled with horror, and her mouth was slightly open. This is no longer something that can be done by human power alone, right? The man with the laser cannon on his shoulder saw that Miu was so powerful, and he fled directly to the gate behind him without saying a word. The awakener was so fast, and his figure was like the wind. He was about to escape from this scarlet space. But a sharp needle of flame condensed from behind suddenly shot out, instantly piercing his forehead. Immediately afterwards, the destructive flame contained in the fire needle erupted. In an instant, the man was burned into a pile of slag. After getting rid of the two ants, Miuqiu looked at the huge blood pool in front of him. Walking slowly to the control console beside the blood pool, Miuqiu pressed the red button on it. In an instant, the blood in the blood pool rolled, and the ripples were like an earthquake. A high platform emerged from the bottom of the blood pool, and a square-shaped dark purple box was suspended on the platform. On the front of the box was a purple-black single eye, which exuded a deadly atmosphere, which made people feel terrified. The moment this strangely shaped box appeared, the bloody smell in the entire cave suddenly reached its peak. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 266. This is, a weapon box. Lu Qianqian also looked at the strange-shaped box suspended on the high platform, frowning slightly. She recognized at a glance that this box was the same as the space box used by Luo Ziyuan and others to store weapons. But somehow, when the box appeared, she actually felt an inexplicable feeling of fear. You know, Lu Qianqian has profound attainments in the soul. But now as an S-class awakened person, she was actually shocked by the aura emanating from a palm-sized box. Miuqiu suddenly closed her eyes. Did you hear that? What? Lu Qianqian didn't react for a moment. The cry from the abyss of hell. Miuqiu opened her eyes suddenly and threw out a ball of hot black flames from her hand. In an instant, the black flames hit a mechanical door behind the two people. The mechanical door made of dense metal was instantly dissolved into a big hole. A figure in a white coat emerged from behind the door. It's you. Duan Muking walked out from behind the door and looked at Miuqiu with a look of horror in his eyes. He did not expect that Miuqiu and the two men would break into this forbidden area in the village so easily. Duan Muqing lowered his head and glanced at the remains of his two men again, with a fierce light flashing in his eyes. Damn it, those losers couldn't even deal with them. Duan Muking let out a breath, looked at Miuqiu and said with a smile. You two broke into the forbidden area of my village at night. Isn't this the way to treat guests? Miuqiu also smiled slightly, with the corners of her mouth raised. It is indeed inappropriate for us to do this, but the village chief's actions are impressive. Miuqiu turned her head and looked at the majestic blood pool in front of her. The surging blood condensed into a small stream. Such a huge pool, I'm afraid a lot of human blood will be used, right? I wonder how many people the village chief drained to form this pool of human blood. Miuqiu looked at Duan Muqing indifferently, with an inexplicable smile on her lips. That's right, all the blood in this pool is made of human blood. The moment Miuqiu said these words, Duan Muqing's expression changed slightly. The flowers that have been watered by countless people's lives, I really want to see what they look like. After saying that, Miuqiu began to walk towards the faint purple box suspended on the high platform. Bang! Suddenly, the sound of a gunshot reached my ears. A bullet passed in front of Miuqiu, and Miuqiu stopped. Miuqiu slowly turned around and looked behind. Duan Muking, who was wearing a white coat, was seen holding a pistol in his hand, and the muzzle was still filled with gunpowder smoke. Throwing the pistol aside, a sneer appeared on Duan Muking's face. He. I didn't expect that I would be discovered by you. Duan Muqing murmured in his mouth, and the muscles on his face suddenly became distorted. You noticed it from the beginning, right? Duan Muking recalled Miuqiu's questions to Luo Ziyuan and his party when they first arrived in the village. Miuqiu shook her head. I just feel that this village is too comfortable. A paradise like this that only exists in storybooks is rarely seen even before the end of the world. Not to mention in this apocalyptic world where everyone is in danger. I see. A sinister smile appeared on Duan Muking's face. Even he did not expect that this seemingly peaceful village would become the biggest suspicion. Many people have come to our village before, but none of them can make it out alive. Duanmuking slowly raised his head. At this moment, he completely lost the kind face he had before. The corners of his mouth were grinning, and his expression was like that of a bloodthirsty desperado. Do you know where they are now? He spread his hands and stared at the purple box on the blood pool. That was the brainchild of his life. The blood pool surged, and the candle flames rose, illuminating Duanmu's distorted face that looked like a madman, and not long after, including you and your companions. Everyone must become part of this blood river. Duanmuqing's voice gradually became hoarse, and it was even deeper when he said the last sentence. As the words faded, Duanmuking's originally thin body began to gradually bulge. At the same time, various parts of Duanmuking's body also underwent some strange changes. His arms turned swollen blue-black, his chest bulged, his legs were raised several times, and his trouser legs were stretched out by the knotted muscles. The legs and feet turned into the hooves of some kind of beast, with explosive energy hidden under the hairy skin. Half of Duanmuqing's face still looks like a human being, but the other half has prominent facial bones like a falcon. A pair of ferocious insect wings sprouted from its back. As his wings flapped, Duanmuqing, who transformed into a monster, released a powerful and terrifying pressure all over his body. In an instant, Duanmuqing transformed from an ordinary person into a terrifying monster at the top of S-class. Feeling the pressure coming towards him, he looked at Duanmuqing, who had transformed into a different person. A smile appeared on Muqiu's face. He could see that this Duanmuqing was not a congenital person with awakened powers. These limb structures on his body belonged to different alien beasts. In other words, the Duanmuqing in front of him is simply an amalgamation of various monsters. Dare to carry out such crazy biochemical experiments on her own body, Muqiu's understanding of Duanmuqing deepened. This is a real science nut? Feeling the surge of power in her body, Duanmuqing's face became more and more ferocious, and her confidence in her heart reached its peak. He looked at Muqiu, and the two of them, a foot-long sharp claw popped out from his fingertips, and said with a ferocious smile, "Soon, you will all be the final sacrifices for my masterpiece." Muqiu licked her lips slightly, turned to look at Lu Qianqian and said, "He seems to have always been so confident." A low roar like a wolf-like beast came from Duanmuqing's mouth. His body is made of ferocious beasts, and it is inevitable that he will acquire the habits of beasts. Immediately, Duanmuqing swayed like a hound and rushed straight to Muqiu's direction. The bloodthirsty gleam in his eyes flashed frequently. He must first deal with this obstructive man who has seen through his purpose. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 267. Be careful, there are enemies. A cry of surprise suddenly came out in the silent night sky. Then, thick laser beams appeared around the adobe house where Luo Ziyuan and his party lived. The hot blue laser cannon fell from the sky and blasted directly at an adobe house at the foot of the mountain. There were a series of roars echoing in the air, and the dazzling light instantly illuminated the dark night sky. The wooden house where the resistance army led by Luo Ziyuan lived was blasted through and collapsed in an instant. After a long time, a shock came from the collapsed rubble, and the center of the collapsed ruins suddenly splashed with tiles and stones, and dust flew. Countless rubble was shaken aside, and a dusty strong man suddenly lifted a piece of rubble, revealing several human figures below. I saw a man holding a transparent shield with both hands, protecting several resistance companions behind him firmly. During this time, as the strong man threw huge rubble, the transparent shield also bounced countless rubble and broken bricks. Luo Ziyuan and his fellow rebels slowly stood up from the collapsed ruins and looked around. At the foot of the originally quiet and remote mountain, there stood a circle of mysterious figures in black robes. These figures wearing black robes and hoods surrounded the courtyard where everyone lived. Some black-robed people also carried high-tech guns such as laser cannons on their shoulders. Wisps of hot air waves emanated from the cannons, as if venting the endless anger accumulated in them. And in the sky directly in front of everyone, there were 3 hooded purple-robed figures hovering. Damn it, did they find this place? One of the strong men clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. The other few people also showed a resolute look, with a trace of cold sweat on their foreheads. The rebels who came out to carry out the mission this time had already been injured or killed. Even the remaining ones were forced to flee with serious injuries. With only 1/10 of their combat power left, fighting these enemies at this moment would be tantamount to seeking death. Luo Ziyuan looked solemn. He looked around at his companions and frowned. Where is Yu Ming? Axing, the only female beside him, looked around and said hurriedly, Lu Qianqian and Qiumu are also missing. The crowd then realized that 3 people were missing from their team. A few minutes ago, they were all sleeping comfortably in bed. If it weren't for Axing, who had the strongest perception among them, who noticed the abnormality, I'm afraid most of them would be annihilated in the sky full of laser shells. But now is obviously not the time to look for the traces of the missing people. The 3 purple-robed figures floating in the air suddenly spoke, grinning at the few people. Finally found you. You rebels are really ignorant of life and death for daring to ruin my holy church. Luo Ziyuan stared at the 3 purple-robed people floating in the air, like ghosts. It was because he was besieged by these 3 people that he did not rush to his companions in time. These 3 people were all powerful S-level beings. Without replying, Luo Ziyuan slowly pulled out the ancient black iron heavy sword behind him. One of the purple-robed people saw this and gave orders to his men behind him. Leave one alive, and kill all the rest. Eliminate the rebels. The black-robed figures below heard the words and took out iron black boxes from their arms. The ring with crystal core engraved on the fingertips was inserted into the groove of the box, and a stream of light flashed. In an instant, dozens of black-robed figures rushed, holding various weapons in their hands and attacked the direction of the rebels. A great battle is about to break out. Luo Ziyuan's eyes flashed slightly, holding the giant sword without any slowness, and he attacked the black-robed man like the wind. The companions behind him were no less powerful, and some of them shook their bodies and turned into orcs with fangs and claws. With a roar, several orcs followed Luo Ziyuan's steps and killed into the crowd. Some of them took out a box from their waist like Ah Seeing, holding guns and cannons to cover their companions who were charging. Although Luo Ziyuan was injured, his offensive did not weaken at all, and he swung the giant sword in his hand with the momentum of Mount Tai. Every time he raised his hand and fell, it was accompanied by a heavy sound of breaking through the air and splashing scarlet blood. In just a few breaths, several black-robed men who rushed in front had died tragically under Luo Ziyuan's giant sword. And the companions behind Luo Ziyuan, although their strength was not as terrifying as the former, but they were both powerful awakeners selected from among hundreds of thousands, and their momentum was not inferior to Luo Ziyuan in the slightest. The difference in number was nearly 10 times, but once the 2 sides fought, it was difficult to tell the winner for a while. Seeing their men die in the hands of Luo Ziyuan and his men, the 3 purple-robed men could not help but get angry. A bunch of trash. Just when the 3 purple-robed men were about to go into battle, a rustling sound came from the darkness behind them. Then, pairs of densely packed red eyes emerged from the depths of the village. Hiss. I saw ragged and worn-out villagers walking slowly out of the darkness. These kind villagers in the daytime now had bloodshot eyes, looking at the people fighting with greed. To be precise, these fresh bodies with blood and limbs splattered in the battle. More and more villagers gathered from all over the village. With a look of hunger, saliva is dripping from the corners of his mouth. They were all attracted by the strong smell of blood surrounding them. Following the exclamation of one of the purple-robed men, it sounded like Hong Zhongdalu when it reached everyone's ears. All the villagers woke up with a start, and when they saw the purple-robed man's dress, their faces showed panic. They actually knelt down on the ground and said in unison, "Your Majesty." One of the purple-robed men snorted coldly. "Go deal with those rebels." There was obvious disgust in his tone, as if he was looking at maggots crawling under the gutter. Despite the purple-robed man's orders, none of the villagers showed any signs of anger. Instead, they pounced on the rebels and the group like hungry and thirsty vicious dogs. As soon as the rebel orcs who were fighting fiercely took out their sharp claws from the chest of a man in black robes, a thin figure rushed beside him. Without hesitation, the orc stretched out his sharp claws and penetrated the thin figure. But the next second, the orc was stunned when he saw this figure. The person who came to kill him turned out to be a villager with shabby clothes and a fierce face. Before the orc could react, the thin villager in front of him was like a deflated ball. The body quickly shriveled up and turned gray, and the eyes became hollow and sunken. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a skeleton-like, skinny mummy. Gee! The mummified corpse transformed by the villager suddenly let out a scream, and soon opened its withered mouth and came to bite the orc. In an instant, a shrill scream came from the orc's mouth. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 268. A Chiang. Hearing a miserable cry from behind, the remaining few people turned their heads anxiously. But they saw that the strong orcs transformed by their companions were bitten to death by several shriveled mummies. Most of the flesh and blood were bitten off by these horrible-looking shriveled mummies. The gushing blood was splattered all over the ground, flowing into a pool of blood. What was horrifying was that there were countless villagers in tattered clothes scrambling to come to the pool of blood to suck blood. The faces of those villagers who drank the blood suddenly showed extreme satisfaction, and then they joined the team of eating flesh and blood again like they were hungry. And as these villagers greedily ate the flesh and blood organs, their thin bodies kept changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, they all turned into ugly mummies with shriveled bodies and sunken eyes. In just a few breaths, the sturdy rebel orc was eaten by bloodthirsty flesh and turned into a gloomy skeleton with blood. The remaining mummies greedily licked the blood on the skeleton. The rest of the mummies stood up and looked at the rebels' fresh flesh with greedy faces. Everyone looked around in panic, but found that ragged villagers continued to emerge in the darkness around them. These villagers attracted by the blood had hungry eyes on their faces. Looking at the rebels, it was as if they were looking at the top-quality food on the plate. Everyone's eyes were horrified, and when they came to their senses, they were actually surrounded by countless terrifying mummies. It was not until this moment that they suddenly realized that they had entered a mountain village paradise, but a group of mummies monsters on the ground. What's more terrifying is that they all felt the fluctuation of different energy from these mummies. If they had tried their best to fight against dozens of black-robed men just now, they could still fight back. But now, with these terrifying mummy monsters and 3 purple-robed men staring at them, even with the powerful Luo Ziyuan by their side, everyone couldn't help but feel desperate. These mummies that choose to devour people will not stop at all, and they all bite at everyone with greedy faces. At the moment when the mummies transformed by the villagers rushed towards the rebels, the 3 purple-robed men floating in the air drew a gloomy smile at the corners of their mouths. Tick, tick. In the deep cave, sticky scarlet blood dripped down the stone wall to the ground. Duan Muqing, whose whole body was composed of the limbs of wild beasts, fell heavily to the ground. The huge body slowly stood up with the stone wall, and blood was constantly oozing from all parts of his body. And Duan Muqing's face became extremely old, and his skin was wrinkled as if he had aged dozens of years. How is it possible? Duan Muqing's throat kept rolling, and his pupils trembled as he looked at the slender figure in front of him. After a long while, he uttered this sentence hoarsely. How is it possible, so strong? In front of Duan Muqing, Mu Qiu, wearing a white shirt, stood there with one hand in his pocket. He brushed the dust off his shoulders with his other hand, with a smile like the breeze on his face. Mu Qiu smiled and looked at Duan Muqing. You can be incompetent, but you can't be ignorant. On the other side, Lu Qinqin's cheeks bulged and her face was red, as if she was trying to hold back her laughter. Duan Muqing staggered, looking at Mu Qiu with shock in his eyes. He never thought that his invincible body after the transformation was like paper in front of Mu Qiu. No matter how he launched an attack, the opponent could easily disintegrate his offensive. What was even more terrifying was that during the continuous attack, Duan Muqing could clearly feel that the vitality in his body was also madly fading away. Mu Qiu's slender figure was no different from a demon from hell in Duan Muqing's eyes. There was a faint pain everywhere on his body, and even his vision began to blur. Finally, Duan Muqing could not support his crippled body, and his body shook and he fainted on the ground. The huge body made up of various beast parts continued to shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally turned into a human form. Unlike the beginning, Duan Muqing was no longer a handsome face at this moment, but had turned into an old man in his twilight years. Looking at the unconscious old Duan Muqing lying on the ground, Mu Qiu shook his head helplessly. He turned around and walked towards the rolling blood pool behind him. The blood pool was flowing with surging blood, as if it was a burning flame boiling in the pool. A high platform rose above the blood pool, and a purple square box was suspended above the platform. The front of the purple box was inlaid with a blood-red eyeball pattern, with a breathtaking horror and weirdness. Mu Qiu stretched out his hand, and the dark purple box suddenly floated in the air. The moment the box floated on the blood pool, the blood below was like a wave. The blood that gathered into a river condensed into scarlet blood hands, grabbing the floating purple-black box as if it had life. Mu Qiu suddenly snorted coldly, accompanied by a dragon roar, and a dark red dragon in front of him surged out with black flames. An extremely terrifying dragon power echoed in this cave. The dark red dragon circled over the blood pool, emitting boundless might. The countless blood hands below immediately fell back into the blood pool. The rolling and boiling blood pool also disappeared in an instant, like a calm lake without any life. The next second, the huge dark red dragon instantly turned into a little fire and returned to Mu Qiu's body, eliminating its life. Mu Qiu looked up, and a dark purple box floated in the sky into his hand. As soon as he got it, Mu Qiu felt the boundless evil spirit hidden in the box. The mourning and howling like the ghosts of hell faintly came to his ears, which made people tremble and feel palpitations. Interesting. Mu Qiu looked at the mysterious box in his hand and marveled. This box gave him the feeling of a living heart. This box did not have an unlocking groove like an ordinary black box. Only a blood-red eyeball pattern was inlaid on the front. While Mu Qiu was thinking, the ground suddenly shook violently like an earthquake. Mu Qiu looked up at a certain direction in the distance, his eyes flickering. That was where the rebels lived. It looks like something happened over there too. A black shadow door suddenly appeared in front of Duan Muqing, who fell in front of the stone wall in the distance. Countless black arms stretched out from the black shadow door and directly dragged the old Duan Muqing in. Mu Qiu looked at Lu Qianqian beside him and smiled, "Let's go and see what happened over there." Mu Qiu never missed watching the excitement. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 269. Under the night, the stars are shining on the quiet country road. Two figures could vaguely be seen strolling in the countryside as if taking a leisurely stroll. There were bursts of explosions in the sky not far in front of him. Along with the sound of explosion, the sky at the foot of the mountain flashed with blue laser. Mu Qiu was walking on the road, and next to her was Lu Qianqian, who was wearing a red cheongsam and had an enchanting figure. On the country road, beauties are walking beside you, and the aurora in the sky is shining like fireworks. This scene is like taking an outing on a forest trail. Miu was playing with a dark purple secret box in her hand. The box was covered with strange carved patterns. Right above the box, there is also a blood-red one eye inlaid, which makes people lose heart and sink into it once they take a look at it. Miu threw the mysterious box up and down in her hand, feeling the evil aura contained in it, with a look of contemplation on her face. This palm-sized box weighed little, and even Miu didn't figure out how to open it. Under normal circumstances, a specific crystal core ring is required to open this kind of space box for storing weapons. But Miu searched Duan Muqing's body and couldn't find the key. Later, Miu even swallowed up the entire blood pool, but never found the key that could open the box. But the more this happened, the more Miu became curious about the contents of the box. Miu was not in a hurry as to how to open the box. At worst, wait until Duan Muqing wakes up and sees his soul to find out the existence of the key. Although this morbid scientist would be completely useless, this was not a problem for Miu. As for now, Miu suddenly looked forward with a smile on her face. I saw a burst of rapid footsteps in the darkness ahead. Immediately afterwards, the ground began to tremble slightly due to something in the darkness moving too fast. When a figure ran towards Miu and the others from far away. His figure gradually appeared in the eyes of Miu and Lu Qianqian. Mao Yuming. Lu Qianqian's eyes were slightly surprised. That's right, the figure running forward is none other than Mao Yuming, the youngest boy in the resistance army led by Luo Ziyuan. I saw Mao Yuming leaping out of the village in the distance. The upper body still looks like a human, but the legs have turned into two pairs of golden-haired hooves, and there is even a slender tail behind it. What's even more frightening is that behind Mao Yuming are several terrifying mummies with shriveled, black and skinny bodies. The speed of these mummies was also extremely fast, although they were thrown away by Mao Yuming for a distance. But he still pursued this half-grown boy. The eye sockets of these mummies are sunken, and their withered faces reveal a look of extreme hunger and thirst. Mao Yuming's face was also pale, and dense beads of sweat appeared on his forehead due to excessive running. When he saw two vague figures in front of him, he was so frightened that he stopped in his tracks. But when he saw clearly that it was Miu and Lu Qianqian standing not far in front of him, a look of joy suddenly appeared on his face. But a moment later, the hungry cry of the mummy came from behind, and Mao Yuming's little face became frightened again, and he shouted at Miu and the others. Brother Chu, Sister Lu, run! What Mao Yuming didn't expect was that Miu and the others saw the mummy behind him. Instead of running away, he followed suit and came closer. Seeing this, Mao Yuming ran fast, and his four legs that turned into hooves were so fast that they flashed after images. Within a few breaths, Mao Yuming had already stood in front of Miu, hunched over and placed his hands on his knees, panting. Quickly, run quickly, the monsters behind are catching up. However, Mao Yuming obviously underestimated the thirst for blood of the villagers who had turned into mummies. I saw a sallow mummy whose skin had shrunk to the point where only skin and bones were left, and it was chasing Miu and Mao Yuming in a twisted posture that was unimaginable to ordinary people. Feeling the roar of the wind behind him, Mao Yuming subconsciously turned his head to look. I happened to see the ugly mummy with its hideous mouth open. Having exhausted all his energy in escaping, Mao Yuming subconsciously turned his head. At the moment of despair, there was a crisp sound of broken bones in my ears. Mao Yuming looked up nervously, and saw a scene that shocked him. Miu raised her head slightly, stretched out her right arm, and engulfed the mummy's head with her palm. She also held a purple-black box in her left hand. The mummy turned into a villager struggled with its hands and feet, letting out a terrifying low groan, trying to break free from Miu's hands. This posture is no different from those zombie monsters in the outside world that have lost their humanity. Miu closed her palms together and exerted a little force, and the shriveled head of the mummy suddenly made a crisper cracking sound. At this point, this horrifying mummy that made people shudder just by looking at it was completely lifeless. During the whole process, there was no scarlet blood splattering out as expected. Maybe when these villagers turned into mummy monsters, they were no longer human beings in the true sense. Mu Qiu threw the mummy aside and gave Lu Qianqian a look beside her. The latter understood immediately, and a powerful wave of energy erupted all over his body. Behind him, there were even more fiery red foxtails emerging. In an instant, Lu Qianqian rushed into the mummies that were chasing after her. Mao Yuming stared at Mu Qiu with a dull look for a long time. If he remembered correctly, the elder brother Qiu in front of him seemed to be a healing awakener with little combat power, right? But the power that Mu Qiu showed now was obviously not something that a healing awakener could do. As if he noticed Mao Yuming's surprise, Mu Qiu smiled slightly and said, "The strengthening reagent you gave me is effective. I feel full of strength now." After saying that, Mu Qiu raised his arm to show his white muscles. Is that so?" Mao Yuming's mouth twitched slightly. Why did he remember that the effect of this reagent was not so strong? Maybe it was because of different physiques? The messy-haired boy comforted himself like this. In less than a moment, Lu Qianqian wiped out all the terrifying mummies that were chasing after him. Looking at the enchanting figure who easily dealt with a group of mummies, Mao Yuming recalled. The big sister in front of him was a powerful awakener that Uncle Luo praised. At this moment, a more intense roar came from the darkness at the foot of the mountain in the distance. "Oh no, Uncle and the others are in danger." Mao Yuming recalled his companions at the foot of the mountain, his eyes horrified. Seeing Mao Yuming running towards the distance with an anxious look, Mu Qiu and Lu Qianqian looked at each other. "Let's go and see what happened to our allies." Holding the purple box in his hand that was beating faintly like a heart, he felt that there seemed to be something attracting this box. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 270. In front of the collapsed ruins at the foot of the mountain, several remnants of the resistance army were fighting fiercely with a group of villagers who had turned into mummies. The remaining black-robed men retreated to the back like the three purple-robed men floating in the air. They surrounded the villagers and the resistance army and watched the excitement from the sidelines. Since there were these mummified villagers as cannon fodder in front of them, they naturally didn't want to waste their physical energy to fight these desperate criminals. If they were to fight to the death, no one could guarantee that they could survive the opponent's attack of mutual destruction. Looking at more and more mummified villagers gathering around, Luo Ziyuan's eyes showed a solemn look. In the case of serious injuries, it was extremely difficult to deal with these mummies that were more difficult than ordinary zombies. Not to mention that there were those black-robed men around who were eyeing them covetously. The companions around him were already exhausted and were about to collapse. Although Luo Ziyuan held the heavy black iron sword with great momentum, he would cut several mummies in half every time he swung the sword. However, the frequency of Luo Ziyuan swinging the heavy sword was obviously slowing down, and the mummies kept coming to kill him. Seeing this, Luo Ziyuan glanced at the hillside full of rolling stones and broken tiles. The heavy sword in his hand suddenly circled and slashed out. The shriveled bodies of dozens of mummies around were instantly annihilated by the fierce momentum of the giant sword. Then, Luo Ziyuan stretched out his right arm towards the hill above their heads, gathering the remaining energy in his body. An unimaginable gravity was instantly added to the hill covered with rubble. There was a loud boom, and the hill above the mummies was oppressed by the powerful gravity. In an instant, the cliff collapsed, the rubble fell, and countless huge boulders fell from the hillside, making a deafening sound. The mummies at the foot of the mountain had no time to dodge the huge rolling stones that fell like stars. In a short moment, a large number of mummies were crushed into pools of meat by the falling rolling stones. And the mummies who attacked the rebels were instantly reduced by more than half. Luo Ziyuan stood in front of the rebels holding the hilt of his sword, and his chest kept rising and falling due to frequent and intense consumption. The injuries on his shoulders and abdomen were still aching, but the crisis was not resolved. The three purple-robed people watching in front looked at each other. "He can't hold on any longer, go. Get rid of them as soon as possible and leave one alive." In an instant, not only the remaining black-robed believers, but even the three purple-robed people in charge could not stand. They all rushed towards the direction of the rebels. The black-robed people and the remaining mummies rushed to the four remaining rebels together. The purpose of the three most powerful purple-robed people was more obvious, and they attacked Luo Ziyuan holding the black iron heavy sword with a killing momentum. These three purple-robed men were not only very powerful, but also specialized in different fields. Some of them had strange speeds and tricky attack angles, while some transformed into beastmen with infinite strength. Another one specialized in attacking the most fragile soul of the human body. Although Luo Ziyuan was very powerful, he was injured and consumed too much in the previous battle. In the short moment of fighting with the three people, Luo Ziyuan had already fallen into a disadvantage. Feeling the increasingly heavy black iron heavy sword in his hand, Luo Ziyuan knew that he was about to collapse. Looking away, the companions behind him were also caught in a bitter battle. Finally, Luo Ziyuan's eyes flashed with a cold light and made a decision. He retreated dozens of meters and suddenly took off a ring from his waist. The next moment, Luo Ziyuan stood in front of the heavy sword in his hand with an arc flashing, and a heavy and simple aura came to his face. It was not until then that everyone realized that there was a small groove on the hilt of the heavy sword. This heavy sword is actually a box. Then, Luo Ziyuan inserted the ring inlaid with purple crystal core directly into the groove of the heavy sword. The next moment, the sword body suddenly overflowed with light and flashed with arcs. Luo Ziyuan pulled the hilt of the sword violently, and a dazzling long sword made of electric light appeared in front of everyone. "Oh no, it's an S-level weapon." The three purple-robed men were shocked and their hearts sank. But after pulling out the lightning sword, Luo Ziyuan staggered before he stood up again. The powerful aura of the lightning sword came to their faces, and the three purple-robed men looked at each other. "His body can't bear the load anymore, let's kill him." The three immediately made the right choice. Luo Ziyuan stood in place, with a lightning sword several feet long in his hand, drawing dazzling lightning in the air. The huge destructive power of thunder swept across the whole scene in an instant. All the mummies that came into contact with the electric arc twitched and fell to the ground, and some of the fragile ones were instantly turned into charcoal by the high-voltage lightning. The black-robed men who attacked the rebels were also extremely afraid of the flashing lightning and retreated. However, Luo Ziyuan's real target was the three purple-robed men who were in charge. The three purple-robed men seemed to know the power of this lightning sword, and they dodged and did not confront Luo Ziyuan head-on. As time passed, Luo Ziyuan's forehead was soaked with large beads of sweat, and the arm holding the sword began to tremble slightly. Finally, at a certain moment, this powerful S-level awakener could no longer withstand the intense consumption. The powerful lightning sword returned to the heavy sword again, and the momentum disappeared. "He is no longer a threat, come on." Luo Ziyuan clenched the black iron heavy sword in his hand, determination flashing in his eyes. Just when the atmosphere fell into despair, a relaxed voice came to everyone's ears. "I didn't expect it to be so lively here." Everyone heard the sound and went away, only to find a man in a white shirt walking leisurely from a country road in the distance. "It's Chiu Mu." The rebels immediately recognized that the person who came was Chiu Mu, who had disappeared not long ago. An accomplice of the rebels. "Get rid of him together." Without any hesitation, the man in purple robe immediately gave the order. In an instant, dozens of mummies and figures in black robes rushed toward Mu Chiu. Mu Chiu's body did not move, but she suddenly felt the bloody smell in the air. He now finally understood what was attracting the box. It was the blood that was spilled on the scene in this battle. The key to opening this box is not the energy crystal core, but the user's own blood essence. Is it a dark box that can only be opened by swallowing the owner's blood? I just don't know if you can withstand the energy in my body. Mewtwo raised the purple box with one hand and stood it in front of her chest, while her other hand slowly spread out. A drop of crimson blood that seemed to be burning with fire condensed out of Mewtwo's palm. Blood instantly dripped on the one eye on the front of the mysterious box on the chest. The box floating in the sea of blood is opened. A black light shot straight into the sky. In an instant, the sky was dark and the earth was dark, and the already dark night was covered with an ink-like halo. Along with the black stream of light, dark ghosts scattered out of the box. The souls of the dead are constantly circling around Mewtwo's figure, as if it is the most painful curse in the world. Waves of mournful wails came from the mouths of these ghosts, and their eyes were full of fear and resentment. Howling ghosts and gods. At the same time, the black light that filled the sky penetrated countless ghosts and ghosts, turning into a stream of light that converged into Mewtwo's hands. Everyone present was stunned by the scene in front of them. They had never seen this terrifying scene, like a ghost coming out of its cage. Luo Ziyuan in the distance seemed to have thought of something, his pupils trembled, and he said to Ah Xing on the other side, "Do you still remember the rumors of the 3 sacred objects in Zilan base?" Ah Xing was slightly startled. There are not only 2 sacred objects in the base. Suddenly, Ah Xing seemed to understand something, and his expression was enlightened. Yes, it is said that there were originally 3 sacred objects in Zilan base, but the creator of one of the sacred objects was expelled from the base for making a huge mistake. This scientist also took a destruction-level weapon developed at that time away from Zilan base M. Because the prototype of the destruction-level weapon that was just created was too lethal, it sacrificed countless human lives during the period, which was not tolerated by the human race in Zilan base at that time. Ah Xing also recalled the legend. So the base's senior management at that time deprived this destructive weapon of its sacred relic status, and the original 3 sacred relics were changed to 2. That's right. This time, Luo Ziyuan looked at Mewtwo and the box that released boundless evil energy in his hands with a very determined look, and said solemnly, "I think what we are seeing now is what once made countless people in Zilan base change their expressions. But the legendary 3rd sacred object that makes many people salivate. The box of monsters.